The Cuyahoga County Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, December 10th, 2018 is called to order, and I would ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher is absent at the moment. Mr. Shrine.
Here.
Ms. Brown. There is a quorum.
Thank you very much, and let the record show that Ms. Baker is also in attendance. Thank you very much. And we have a person signed in for public comment.
Yes, Ms. Kim Mann.
Okay. Hold on a minute. We're gonna.
There you go.
Am I on now? Okay.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Kim Mann. I represent Cleveland Divestment Project. We are an activist group that our primary goal is to fight climate change by trying to get banks to stop funding new fossil fuel projects like pipelines. We first approached the county treasurer back in August. We were curious to see who the county was doing banking with. At that time, he made us aware of the request for proposal that was going to be coming up to renew the contract with the banks that the county uses. He told us that U.S. Bank was one of the banks that you use. We have a particular issue with U.S. Bank. We told him about back in April of 2017, after much pressure from indigenous groups and activist groups. U.S. Bank held their shareholders meeting, and at that time they announced they had a change to their environmental policy, which included that the company would no longer provide project financing for oil and gas. And furthermore, it also said that in the future, any future relationships with a company in the oil and gas industry would be subjected to an overseeing process to determine if it was worth getting into a relationship with them, that they would do some ethical checking on this company. And so all the groups that had been pressuring them to stop investing in fossil fuels, were applauding this decision, and there was a lot of good press for U.S. Bank leading the way in this type of thing. But then before the end of the year was out, back in December of 2017, U.S. Bank went ahead and renewed their agreement to give $4 billion to Energy Transfer Partners, which has an especially egregious reputation in the oil and gas industry. Over 800 violations to date that I'm aware of, at least 13 here in Ohio. They racked up over $2 million in fines. Plus, there was that whole shady deal with the Stoneman House that they promised that they would preserve and protect, even as they were making efforts to purchase the property and then ultimately bulldozed it. So there is not only the question of the misleading wording. I understand if you have a background in finance, you realize that project financing just means you're not making a loan using the actual pipeline as collateral for that loan. Of course, most activists are not in the finance industry, so this fine point was lost on that. Furthermore, they had to question what type of due diligence had been done on Energy Transfer Partners that allowed Energy Transfer Partners to pass muster. I guess my time is up.
You can take a minute or two
Okay.
to finish your
Okay, at the
presentation.
time, Joe Ferris had suggested that maybe our group might want to be involved and give some input in the request for proposal process, specifically on U.S. Bank. And then the position changed hands, and now we are talking with Mr. Murray, and he suggested that we approach you to let you know that we are asking for U.S. Bank to not be considered in the request for proposal. He did mention that they might include some kind of language in the rating system because you do have an ethics clause, but I feel that that would kind of dilute the importance of the ethics of the companies that you are considering having a relationship with. I believe that it should be a hurdle that they have to pass to be considered rather than just a line item, unless if I'm misunderstanding, he may not have meant it that way, but that was my understanding of it. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, we greatly appreciate you coming in and sharing that with us, and we will take it under advisement.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, also, Mr. Cunningham signed in to speak.
Okay, you may come forward.
Look, my name is Randy Cunningham, live in Cleveland, Ohio. One angle that I think you should take a look at is that various municipalities in the past have used as a criteria for who they do business with the rating of a bank regarding the Community Reinvestment Act, whether they invest in the neighborhoods where they have business and have depositors and business relationships and all. That is to make sure that banks invest in their communities and all. It's got a long history behind it. And I think that it's be very good for counties and cities to start looking at the environmental implications of and activities of the banks that they do business with. In spite of the national attempt to ignore it, we have seen horrific results from climate change, and it is a topic that I think has to be on the minds of local government and has to be a criteria for who they do business with. That's about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Has anybody else signed in?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the meeting from December 5th. Those minutes are in your packet. Do we have a motion relative to those minutes?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from December 5th, 2018. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Ayes have it. The minutes are approved from December 5th, 2017. Item number 5, matters referred to the committee. We have one piece of legislation. This is a second hearing on Resolution 2018-0249.
Resolution number 2018-0249, authorizing an amendment to contract number CE 1600270 with Highland Group for insurance brokerage and risk management services.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Jonathan McGorry, Assistant Director of Law in the county's Law Department. Last time we met here, you all had a number of concerns and questions about a potential new policy to our insurance portfolio, namely a public officials liability insurance policy. I've come prepared to answer additional questions you may have about this new policy, but I'd also like to propose a way to give this committee some more time to consider this matter without needing to place any hold on the existing policies that we already have and creating any concerns about any of those policies lapsing. So I propose as an option available to this committee that we table the issue of the new policy, and I will bring that forth as an amendment to this agreement in early 2019 to just hear the new policy. I could bring somebody in from Highland who can kind of get into more of the nitty-gritty about the policy, so you can answer some even more of your questions. And in addition, since I sent forward to this committee some additional information since our last meeting, I was able to find an example of what this policy looks like. So you can kind of see the meat and potatoes of what is covered, what's not. The only caveat I'll put in there is I have the big print, which tells you what you get, but I don't have the fine print that tells you what they're taking away. That I wouldn't be able to get until actually seeing what our policy would be. So that is a proposal I present to the committee. But if you would like to consider this policy today, I have come prepared to answer the questions that you may have.
Okay, questions by my colleagues? Councilman Tuma.
Thank you, through the chair. So if you were proposing to do an amendment in early 2019, when does this current policy run through? I thought it ran through December 31st.
So this contract is with the group that works with all the different carriers to get us our various policies. So our policies don't all lapse January 1. They lapse various times throughout the year. So I think our first one that lapses, we have a pollution policy that's up in early January. And our property insurance, which is sort of the biggest policy we have in here, is up early next year as well.
Okay, so there'd be no harm in waiting if we did that.
Correct, correct. So if we waited on this new policy, since we don't have it in place as is, I mean, if something were to happen between now and getting the new policy, that would be an issue. But when I presented this new policy to the executive, there was no recommendation to have it backdated or anything like that. Just this seems like a good idea to cover, provide some additional insurance to the county. So go forth and request it.
So if I hear what you're recommending that we approve this resolution as is, and it would be with the understanding that if the administration decides to go forward on this additional coverage, that this would be brought back to us as a contract amendment. Is that correct?
That's correct. The premiums I've been given a rough estimate for were about $120,000 a year for this new policy, and this agreement, extending it next year, I've only asked for an additional $2,000. So I wouldn't have the funds to procure this new policy as is today.
Further questions? Ms. Simon?
So I apologize, I wasn't in attendance last week. What types of coverage are you looking, as the administration, looking to cover? What kind of acts for public officials?
For the new policy through the chair, this is basically an errors and omissions policy. So it covers any legal liability we have, anytime the county would be required to pay for the defense of an employee. So through state law, we're required to represent our employees in civil lawsuits and to pay any penalties, fees, damages, as long as the employee is working within good faith and within the scope of their employment. So that's the biggest piece that this would cover. And in addition to that, one helpful thing with policies like this is if something were to come up, if there's a patent dispute, we would need to hire specialized counsel that we don't already have. It would cover those costs as well, most likely, generally speaking. There's always going to be caveats, and depending on the circumstances, certain things might not be covered, but that's generally speaking what this policy would be for.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Baker?
From memory, I thought that this policy had an increase built in for that additional coverage. I thought it was, did you say 2,500, or I thought that was already built into that number?
So I presented initially to procurement the additional $120,000 needed to obtain this new policy. They came back and said, the budget office came back and said, looking at the biennial budget, this wasn't baked in there. You do have some savings in the amount of $2,500 that I can give you without having to amend the budget. And they said, we've seen that you've gotten certain savings in the past. Try to see if you can get those savings to equal the $120,000. I knew that wasn't going to be terribly likely, but I always kind of had the intent of coming back here anyway. So my thought is, if I'm going to come back and request more money, why not I use that to give this item some more time and consideration for this committee?
So may I follow? So if we were if we would have approved last time this 1.4 million, it would not have given us the scope of what we thought it would have been giving us based on the additional services it would have provided.
Through the chair, The scope as it is today would give us the authority to procure this type of insurance. Our contract is for a broker to procure various types of insurance, and it's not explicitly stated throughout the agreement what policies we're looking for.
Okay.
I would need the budget for the additional policy.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Tooman.
Thank you, through the chair. So you addressed Ms. Simon's question regarding covering defense of an employee in a civil suit, if it's under good faith and within the scope of employment, which I understand. Does it cover the defense, any criminal acts?
So through the chair, the policy that I found actually stated that it does cover criminal acts, but then at the very top it says it will only cover losses that the county would be legally obligated to pay. So the county is only legally obligated to pay defense of civil cases. Criminal cases, as far as I know, I've never seen a criminal case where the county was required to pay for the defense of a criminal defendant. So though it's written in there, when I share this to you, don't think that this is going to create any sort of mandate that the county defend criminal defendants.
Yeah. The only question I have, and maybe I'm digging too much in the weeds, is if there's, restitution on the part of the, defendant, and they're looking towards us to cover that, I just want to make sure that county's not on the hook for that. That's
Yeah,
all.
through the chair, I remember you kind of raised that point in the last meeting. I dove into this to answer that. And it states in this policy, which is, again, is an example, and I'd have to look at the policy we were given, but any intentional wrongdoing will defend you, but if it comes out that you were actually, it was indefensible, you did intend to do something with malice or willful neglect, you have to repay any amounts that the insurance carrier provided. So if our insurance company pays out for the defense, they got to pay back the insurance.
Okay, that's kind of what I was looking for. All right, thank you.
So, I'll go to Ms. Simon. your
I'm just
question?
unclear now. Does this policy, you anticipate coverage for criminal defense counsel, but not payment if somebody's found guilty and has to pay restitution?
Through the chair. So I guess the two ways to think about it is you have civil cases where an individual person brings a lawsuit, and you have criminal action where the prosecutor is saying you have violated a criminal violation.
Yeah, I do know the difference, but
Okay, sorry,
are we
sorry.
going to have criminal, what I'm asking, are we paying for criminal defense counsel through this policy?
Through the chair, no. Because there's no requirement standing today that would require us, the county, to pay for criminal defense.
I'm asking about the new one that you were trying to include.
This new policy is only going to cover costs that we're already legally obligated to pay.
So what's 120,000 for? Civil cases?
Civil cases. So if a civil judgment came out and said an employee, though they were working in the scope of their employment, though they were working in good faith, for whatever reason we find there to be a $1 million judgment against this person. Under Ohio state law, we would be required as the county to pay that $1 million. So that's what this would be covering.
So, the new government we're coming up on 8 years that we've been in operation. During that time, are you aware of any expenses that the county has incurred that if we had had this coverage, we would have been able to file a claim and collect on that insurance?
Through the chair, I don't. I was brought into the county in July of this year, but I would have to assume that there had been lawsuits against the county, naming county individuals defendants. Anytime we would have been able, even if our own in-house counsel represented those individuals, any cost that they had would be covered under this policy.
Okay, Councilman Shine.
Let's just go through a what if. What if something were to happen in regards to a claim filed in regards to the jail, and an individual operating within the jail as an employee of the county? Their action could be treated, one, civilly, is a violation of somebody's constitutional rights, of which the county then potentially could be responding with a civil claim. The person also could have been violating that and done a criminal action. That same person is going to have two actions going in the court, one of which they're the defendant as in the criminal case, or the second one they'll be as a party to the claim if it's a civil action. Tell me specifically which ones that these policies will be providing defense on.
Through the chair.
Because there's not going to be a criminal determination until after the trial.
Correct.
And some judge or somebody pleads to a matter and the judge accepts the plea.
Through the chair, the criminal action, there'd be no claim under this policy for the insurance carrier to pay for the costs of defending the criminal charge. In the policy that I found specifically, in the bold print, in the large print, said we do not cover jails. So in this
Oh,
specific.
so this particular, okay, so the jail's an exempted practice. Okay, let's move it to, give me we'll move it to a different area within the county, something outside the jail where you've got the same exact kind of fact pattern out there. Civil claim, potential criminal.
So again, in the criminal claim, criminal charge, the county wouldn't be obligated to pay for any defense, so there'd be no cost to be reimbursed by the insurance carrier. In the civil case, we would, depending on the circumstances, if the person was working within the scope of their employment and in good faith, we would be obligated to pay for their defense and any claims that came out of that. You know, if later a criminal charge were to come down and to say this person was criminally liable for XYZ, I could see the insurance carrier saying, under our policy, it was determined that if you were to, you actually committed any wrongful act or intentional act, you would be obligated to reimburse the insurance carrier for any payments they paid for the defense, your defense. And so it's possible, again, you gotta look at the specific circumstances, but generally that's how I would see it playing out.
So we are not going to provide any, even though there's not been a determination of guilt, we're not providing a defense as far as the defense of that person being, a claim being brought by the prosecutor is against that individual.
Through the chair, yeah, if it's through the prosecutor, if it's a criminal charge, there's no obligation for the county to pay. There's no
Use the
county
word, keep
funds.
using the word obligation. Is there, will we, the obligation doesn't get formed until theoretically there's a determination of guilt, because we perhaps will have an obligation, using your word, to defend, because there has not been a determination. So you're saying that if you do something personally that is in violation of both the civil and criminal code, you're not going to get any relief from working within, you're going to argue is within the scope of your job to provide that person with any defense on the criminal side.
Correct, yeah,
Okay.
the Ohio State Code, the Ohio Revised Code only requires defense in a civil case.
Okay.
Okay,
I have a follow-up.
yes.
Mr.
Yes, you may.
So if this policy were ever to be approved by this council going forward, the supplement, this would only apply to current employees, not to past employees, or, right?
Through the chair, correct. Yeah, I stated when I presented this issue to the executive, there was no request to have this backdated. You could hypothetically request that this policy is retroactive to a certain date, but I've gotten no direction to do so. So no, this would only be going for current employees going forward.
It would
What
be
level of
current,
employees? Is it public, is it elected officials or all employees?
Through the chair, it goes from elected officials all the way down to volunteers. It covers a wide net of folks that work for the county.
and it's current employees and only actions that occurred after the start date of the policy.
Correct.
Okay. Ms. Baker?
I would like to note for the Finance Committee that if this amendment is under the cap for Board of Control, that it could be forwarded to Board of Control, and that you may, as chair of this committee, not want it there and want it brought back here, given the extensive questions that have been asked.
It's a good point, thank you.
Through the chair, I looked at that. I was curious about that as well, because the premium would be around $120,000, which would be under that cap. But I did see in the code that if it is outside of what was budgeted for that department for that year, that it would need to go to council. But if for whatever reason that doesn't catch it, yeah, council can request that matters be referred to it.
Okay. Anything else? Obviously, there's a lot of interest in this. I have concerns. I'm not sure this is a good deal. You know, it's easy to think of policies that cost a lot of money and pay out under a pretty narrow set of circumstances, and you can pay and not get much back. So, but that's another discussion. I think what you've proposed is a way to defer that particular discussion, but move forward on this this set of actions which the county needs for its protection. So and this is supposed to start on the 1st of next year, you know, so so I would like to ask if there's a motion to move resolution 2018-0249 with a recommendation for second reading suspension. Is there a second? Okay, before I call the question, I'm gonna fill in, Mike, on what we're voting on. And what, no, we understand your obligations. We're about to vote on resolution 2018-0249. We had a considerable discussion about the proposed additional coverage that had been brought up about public officials and any other county officers, and what the administration proposed to us and that we're amenable to is to simply approve this contract as is, and there's not enough money anyway in it for the additional coverage. And if the administration decides to move forward on that additional coverage, they would bring it back to us separately as a contract amendment. So this passage would not authorize that additional insurance coverage without further discussion. And so the motion was to refer this resolution to the full council for second reading suspension so we can pass it next week before its effective date on 1/1/19. Do you have any further question on? Okay. Any further discussion from anybody? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. And it is so recommended.
Thank you.
Okay. Under miscellaneous business, we have legislation that's been referred to us at the last, coming up at the next council meeting on the 11th, tomorrow. We're not expecting to meet on that legislation until after the first of the year. We're advised it's not urgent, and I would expect on January the 14th, after the organizational meeting and after the first meeting of council, that we would meet on that, and by that time we might have other business as well. So that's kind of what we're looking like. Anything else? Hearing none, there being no further business that holds our attention, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.